Hello and welcome back to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, we're breaking down the year in the comic book industry in two parts. In part one, we'll look at the state of the comic book industry as a whole, as well as what things were going on in society that may have impacted the comic book industry during that year. We'll talk big picture about what's going on at DC and independent comics, then we'll shift our focus to Marvel. We'll look at who is creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics debuted or ended. In part 2, we'll dive deep into Marvel's longest-running characters, Matt Murdock. We'll look at what the year had in store for the Man Without Fear, key things that happened, and who joined or left his world before spotlighting one key issue or story. From there, we'll wrap up the year's discussion with a takeaway before moving on to another year and a whole new discussion. We're excited to have you join us on a trip through comic book history. We are back with the second half of 2005, the year in Daredevil. My name is Dwayne. With me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, we're back and we get to talk Daredevil this week.
I know, it's going to be awesome. This is going to be a lot of fun. I am very excited because I'm a huge fan of these books.
There are three really good stories this year, but it's a little... I have a little sadness because we actually are coming to an end of the Brian Michael Bendis books. It bleeds a little bit into 2006, but these are the last books that Brian Michael Bendis has and I've really enjoyed his run of Daredevil.
Oh yeah, they are fantastic. There's no question about it. This has just been early enough in his career. It's really his first shot at a big, comic book company character. This is a guy who just basically laid it all just on the line and did one of the best stories of his career right out of the gates. So, yeah, there's nothing but awesomeness in this series.
All right, let's jump in and let's talk about what happened with Daredevil this year. The year in Daredevil.
Okay, Dwayne. So, Daredevil was in a lot of places this year, obviously. And it's a weird time in the Marvel Universe. What with, people disappearing into pocket universes and everything. Tell me a little bit about the titles that at least his name pops up in. New or reprint or whatever they are.
Yeah, well, there is a mountain of appearances throughout the entire Marvel Universe. The main ones with his name on it are Daredevil Volume 2, issues 67 to 78. He also had Daredevil Redemption, issues 1 through 6, and Daredevil Father, issues 1 through 4. Now, I didn't get a chance to read the Redemption or Father stories. Do you know much about either of those?
Father, I know quite a bit about. That actually is Joe Quesada coming back and doing a Daredevil story. And it's weird because the art looks very different from the art Joe Quesada did when he was working with Kevin Smith back in the day.
Right.
And it kind of goes back and again deals with some backstory for Matt Murdock. It is probably not an essential read, but it is something that if you happen to get time and you wanted to, it's a pretty good story, and it's Joe Quesada writing and drawing it, and it was something I enjoyed. I've got them out in the bins. I haven't read them in a while, so I would not feel confident expounding on exactly what happens, but I know that at the time they were Joe Quesada and it was Daredevil, so I was pretty excited to get them. And they do have crazy sort of foil covers. So they look really cool as well. Got kind of raised type of shiny covers. So
interesting.
Yeah, you can do all sorts of interesting stuff to make your books more expensive when you do it cheap. So
right. Do you know anything about the Redemption book?
I don't.
Okay, have to do some investigating into that one. But yeah, so in the show notes, you can see all the other titles that Daredevil appeared in. There also is the Daredevil versus Punisher book that you were talking about, too. There were 5 issues of that came out this year. I did not get a chance to look at that one either, but it sounded like that one was kind of interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that is a. Those are always a little bit more kind of dark, and it's well worth again the read if you have time. I love the guy who did it. Stray Bullets was actually one of my favorite series back in the day, and in a lot of ways, what's kind of crazy is that the guy who did these books, I gotta remember his name now. The crazy thing is David Lapham actually has kind of a DNA very similar to Brian Michael Bendis, in that he
Okay.
comes out of writing independent crime comics, and so he's a really good fit to bring into Daredevil stories. So, oh.
All right. So if we're focusing on the main Daredevil run, we're looking at issues 67 to 78, written by Brian Michael Bendis and artwork by Alex Maleev. Now, this has been the group that we've had for most of the last couple years, and I'm confident to say they pretty much stuck the landing here pretty well, because they have 3 stories this year that cover basically December of 2004 to February 2006 to tell just this final set of stories with Daredevil before the pair move off and go to a different title. And the year begins with the continuation of the Golden Age storyline that starts in December. In it, we learned immediately about Alexander Bont. Now, this is the Kingpin before Wilson Fisk that we were teased in that giant book in November. He was released from prison and plans to get revenge on Daredevil and Matt Murdock for helping him go to prison. And across 5 issues, we see just how powerful Bont was and how Daredevil got him arrested, as well as how Matt Murdock made sure he went to prison for most of his life. Bont enlists the reformed Gladiator to kidnap Matt Murdock and beat him before attempting to reveal his now widely known secret on the streets of Hell's Kitchen. This was a really, really interesting story, and I have to tell you, I was a little bit skeptical about the Kingpin before there was Kingpin. But this Alexander Bont character that they came up with across this story, I think actually kind of filled the bill, actually lived up to the expectation. That story worked for me, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, he's kind of this old world gangster.
Yes.
Basically the guy who's sitting around the smoky rooms with the malls and everything else, and it's also kind of a play on comics lore in that when they talk about Golden Age, there is no real Golden Age for Marvel Comics in terms of Daredevil, because he started in the Silver Age. So the Kingpin essentially only started in the Silver Age. So before the Kingpin was there, somebody must have been back in the Golden Age, right? But
right.
that was mostly DC Comics that's doing stuff there. The Golden Age Marvel was really not superhero stuff for the most part. There were some, the Captain Americas and that sort of thing, but so it's an interesting sort of look back to what's going on in the days before the Kingpin comes around, and I think it really hit too. The other thing though, when you say enlists, I think that's a light word for threatens to murder the daughter that you don't know you have if you don't help him.
Yeah,
or something like this.
There was some blackmail done in order to ensure that Gladiator would in fact help him, because he did not want to return to doing any of that sort of thing. So
no, he was thoroughly forced in.
Right. So, meanwhile, there is one other little storyline that's going on across these books, and it's Agent Del Toro of the FBI approaches Matt Murdock asking for help understanding why he and other superheroes why are they superheroes, and how do they how to come to terms with her inheriting that white tiger amulet, which she now has because of the death of her uncle Hector Ayala. Murdock, as Daredevil, does helping her learn how to use the amulet and her new powers, which actually comes in handy because Del Toro is someone who then comes to the aid of Matt Murdock in that big confrontation on the streets of Hell's Kitchen with the Gladiator and Alexander Bont.
So how does the FBI let somebody whose uncle is a superhero be the agent assigned to tracking the superhero, by the way? There's a coincidence there that is also a dereliction of any sort of research on part of the FBI. But anyway.
Very conflict of interest there, yes.
But it was interesting. I liked the character, and I liked the fact that, there's a point at which, she's like, look, she gets being a cop. She gets service and the like. But what is the reason for putting on the long underwear and running down and doing this? And what Daredevil essentially tries to show her is that what he's doing is trying to make a difference. And like he says, the costume, the mask is just a symbol, right?
Yeah.
That almost like the shield or something like that for a police officer, or the uniform for a police officer. That's what the costume is, only with the idea that obviously it's not sanctioned by anybody and is super illegal and could get him arrested if people actually connect him properly to it. So,
right.
Really not at all like a police officer's uniform. So anyway, but yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. They did a nice job with it.
I liked how, and it very plausible too. Like Matt Murdock, when she approaches him and is like, "Why are you a superhero?" Because like I know you're Daredevil. I just can't prove it. And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about, FBI agent. You're just trying to ensnare me into admitting that I'm something I'm not." And they go round and round on this a couple times before he finally agrees. And then they like meet up on the roof, and suddenly he's Daredevil, and she's still talking to him like he's Matt Murdock, but he's not acknowledging any of that at all. But he does end up helping her, which I do love, and I do feel like that is in line with his character. Would do that as well, but is trying to do it in a, I guess, quote unquote smart way. But I liked it, and then having immediate dividends, because she comes to his aid there at the end of this story after getting, I think, fired from the FBI, if I remember correctly, in this story as well.
She quits.
Oh yeah,
she quits because when essentially the boss is like, "Yep, I'm going to take the deal and put Murdock, essentially let the Kingpin out so that I can put Murdock away." Right. She's like, "I quit." And he's like, yeah, well, good, because you were fired anyways. So
yes.
She just avoided the whole getting fired thing. But
right. So so that's where the year starts, which is good story. But after that, we get one of my favorite Brian Michael Bendis stories to date. This is a story called Decalogue. In it, we see a support group, the Devil Among Us, trying to come to grips with their run-ins with our horned hero. Things start with a junkie telling how she started going straight after seeing her boyfriend and his enlisted help Bullet get taken down, when they had designs on taking over for the Kingpin after Daredevil's proclamation that he was the new Kingpin. We get a story from another group member about failing to honor his father's wish from prison to have Foggy Nelson killed. And then from there, the stories and the group take a bit of a turn. The Daredevil support group continues with the wife of a superpowered serial killer telling how Daredevil tracked down her husband but refused to let him fall to his death. The killer's last intended victim, whom Daredevil saved, turned out to be another member of the group. and doesn't take kindly to the story of the troubled man being plagued by demons. That was the whole reason this serial killer was doing it, was because there was this demon telling him, or demons telling him. And it just, there's something about just the way this sort of, I feel like I've seen this movie before, right? This felt very cinematic, the way this story was set up, and there's still more to come on this story. But I loved the way we see this support group, we see these individuals, and we start getting these stories, and it coincidentally they just sort of kind of feed off one another a little bit.
Well, I mean, he's playing basically on a combination of the Bible and Boccaccio's Decameron. So these are basically like stories that have been around for 1,000 years or 3,000 years or whatever. So the Decameron essentially is that idea that you've got all these travelers who are going on this pilgrimage, and every night when they stop, each of them takes a turn telling their story to the other ones, right, as part of the voyage. And this is kind of like that. You've got all of these people who are trying to deal with sort of the tempest that is Daredevil in their lives, that get together for this support group and tell their stories of how either Daredevil has affected them positively or negatively or whatever. But then it turns out they're all interconnected. And that, in fact, in the very middle of them is essentially Daredevil in the guise of Matt Murdock just sort of hiding there, and his query, the guy who is actually the one that's sort of causing all of this. And so you get this crazy...
Yeah, spoilers to where I was going
with never mind.
The story.
We'll get that later. But I mean, yeah, so, so we'll just go to they were telling their, all these people sitting around telling their stories, and it's all sort of interconnected as they go through it. And then also, you look at the 5 covers of this book.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the covers too, because these are amazing looking. They're all these solid color, like Daredevil's in white. They're all a solid single color, and then there is a black silhouetted figure or something going on in there, and then there is, like, for issue 2, honor your mother and father.
Oh, like Bible verse type things.
Yeah.
Commandments and the like. Yep.
So very different than anything I can remember ever seeing, like definitely in Daredevil, just, or in comics in general.
Very striking visual design. It looks more like a poster of some sort than it really does as a cover.
Yeah. So the support group continues with a tale from one of Mila Donovan's friends, who went to her wedding with Matt Murdock and whose daughter later killed herself after surviving a bank robbery by the Jester. Now, as this is going on, there's been this mysterious member that has been intimating that there's something nefarious about Daredevil and that he's somehow causing some of these things to happen. And and sort of goading members of the support group to tell their story in a way to then say that he would then reveal all these bad things about Daredevil and that sort of thing. So there is apparently these deep dark secrets and across all these tales, and then out of the blue says, but you'd know something about that, right, Matt Murdock? And Matt Murdock is there in the room with them, like, has been there the whole time, has been listening to all of these stories being told about him, and there he is right there. It is so just, I should have expected it, but yet I didn't expect it all at the same time.
So now, question. When the guy says he's there, the way he explains that Murdock's been able to be there is by saying, look, he's a ninja and he's got powers only like 5 people on the globe still has. And that's why he's able to be invisible there. And Murdock's basically like, he's just lying to you. I'm not a ninja. Well, how was he there then? Or
Yes.
was he not actually there the whole time, and he just sort of wandered in at that point?
Slipped in, yeah.
Story?
I
What's
I
your
mean,
opinion? Was he there all the time?
My my opinion is that he wasn't there the whole time and that he slipped in.
Okay. Because Matt Murdock wouldn't lie to people.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Remember, he's the one that called a press conference to say categorically that he was not, in fact, Daredevil.
Definitely not Daredevil.
Yeah. Right. So this story ends with Murdock confronting the demon that had possessed the Jester and is currently inhabiting that mysterious member of the group, and has interfered with so many of the lives that, whether they knew it or not, that were a part of this support group. And after, he tries to explain to the group why he does the things he does. And for the first time, he takes off his mask and Matt Murdock publicly admits to outsiders that he is Daredevil. And I think there was something about the way that book ended, with him coming back to that support group as Daredevil, basically apologizing for, causing upheaval in their lives, and, saying that he was well intentioned, and then taking off the mask and admitting that, he is who he is. I loved that story.
Yeah. He is absolutely terrible at keeping a secret. For somebody who so desperately needs to keep a secret to stay out of jail, he is terrible at it. But it was really just overall, and this is interesting because you have, since we started, you've had an affinity for Brian Michael Bendis stories.
Yes.
And we've maybe said this before, but I think even more than other times, this is the most Brian Michael Bendis of all stories.
Yes.
So it does not surprise me that you are a big fan, because it really is mostly a bunch of people sitting around in a church basement talking about their feelings, and then occasionally we have like some flashbacks or whatever. But in terms of things that actually happen, there is not much going on in these books other than a church support group.
Yes, and some jerk that is kind of like goading people into telling things they don't want to tell in this room. Yeah, I can't. I don't need like tons of action. I just need a really interesting story, and having it very well told, and art that looks interesting, and just all the components of that were in this story. And whether it's cliche, whether it's been done a million times, I can think of about half a dozen movies that are set up very similar to this. But it is a comic book story that I didn't think could be told in a comic book, that ends up just knocking it out of the park for me.
Because it's just a great story that just happens to be told in a comic.
Correct. Yes.
The crazy part of it is that you need to have somebody like Maleev, who is so talented that he can make a bunch of people sitting around a church basement actually action-packed.
Yeah.
Again, with a lesser artist, with somebody who can't put that kind of kinetic sort of feel into everything, this could be a boring story. But instead, it's just electrifying.
Yeah, I mean, the flashbacks felt really, really well done, and they felt like they were like happening right now. And then just the way when the support group members started getting after each other, like when the woman that almost died because of the other woman's husband, they start yelling at each other, and you see them trying to separate the two. I mean, it looked so real. Like I could visualize this actually happening, and it would look exactly like it ended up looking on the page. Yep. I loved it.
I agree.
So we have these two just absolutely fantastic stories, but after that we get one last story from Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev that spills over into 2006, the Murdock Papers. In it, we see the Kingpin attempt to use the knowledge of Matt Murdock's secret identity to leverage a pardon for all his crimes from the FBI, all with Ben Urich's unwilling assistance, claiming he has physical evidence proving Murdock is Daredevil. He gets Urich to write a story saying Kingpin will tell it all, forcing the FBI to decide to pursue a case against Murdock rather than their very, very weak case against Wilson Fisk.
Yep.
This, I'm not sure why this didn't happen before now, because I feel like Wilson Fisk's been in jail or in trouble many times to this point, and he's had this knowledge that he could use. Mm-hmm. But it makes perfect sense to me that you would have this story, and I loved the fact that he used Van Urich in order to kind of help seal the deal, because there's the best way, I guess, to ensure that you get what you want is manipulate the people that you're trying to get what you want from by exerting undue pressure from the outside. And so if you have a newspaper saying, hey, Wilson Fisk is going to reveal all this information, the FBI just has to play ball with him. Suddenly you get all that exertion from, random people, politicians, all this sort of thing. You're suddenly like banging on the FBI doors saying, yeah, you should probably do this because, this is important. Yep. You could actually get something done.
Yep.
A great premise to the story. And then at the same time, we actually have Mila Donovan has a change of heart and wants to be back with Matt Murdock again, which he happily wants as well. So that girl has poor timing, because suddenly the tempest is starting up again. Like, things felt like they were maybe starting to die down a little bit. There had been enough time that had passed since the story ran in the Globe saying that he was Daredevil. He had flatly denied it. They had the annulment, and then she comes back, and then suddenly he's back in the papers again saying, Wilson Fisk, Kingpin's got proof that Daredevil and Matt Murdock are one and the same.
Has it ever really died down, though? I mean,
no.
There's no good time to return. So she left partly because Ben Urich had that interview where he implied that really she was the rebound girl.
Yes.
And essentially, the only reason Matt Murdock got married, the only reason Matt Murdock was interested in this, commitment, was because he was still trying to get over the unresolved problems of the death of his ex-girlfriend. And essentially, Mila at that point is like, it's not really why I want to get married, so I'm taking
right.
And I think she's now maybe come to realize that, yes, Karen Page is always going to be a part of things for Matt, but that was not necessarily or really in any way the reason why they're together. They're a pretty good fit in a lot of ways,
Yes.
And so we'll see how that goes. But it is interesting that, yeah, she returns, everything blows up.
Yes.
There you go.
So this story, it leads to Elektra and Black Widow, along with the recently fired Agent Del Toro, trying to help Daredevil get those papers before the FBI does from Fisk's lawyer's office. Yes, he's got these magical Murdock papers in his lawyer's office downtown, and so they're going to go get it. There's a big confrontation that includes Bullseye, of all people, in which Daredevil gets shot and then is briefly presumed dead. All of this, and then Fisk reveals that the papers were all a giant lie, and that he only said all of this to flush Daredevil out so that the FBI could arrest him.
No.
All that Kingpin.
Yeah, and this is really also, Odette Bendis. Like, this is a guy who spent enough time watching movies that the Alfred Hitchcock idea of the MacGuffin, which is also sort of, what Tarantino uses in Pulp Fiction, where you've got the briefcase that they open it,
yes,
and you see the light, and the idea is it doesn't really matter what's in the briefcase. The only idea that matters is that everybody believes that what's in it is important enough that they're willing to kill for it or do whatever they have to get it. And as long as everybody in this story believes that these papers exist and that they somehow can destroy Murdock's life, it provides sort of that propulsion for the story to send everyone there. And
Yes.
then whether Fisk actually had them, he was smart enough to realize didn't ultimately matter for him to get
Right.
it.
Yes. So the conclusion of this epic storyline and the Bendis run on Daredevil is going to be our spotlight for this week. So I'm taking the last two issues, issue 80 and 81, from February and I guess March of 2006 to be our spotlight for this week. Because, I mean, how could I not spotlight the end of the Brian Michael Bendis run on Daredevil as anything other than our spotlight this week?
And that lets you spotlight the end of his run this year, even if it runs a little into 2006. And then we spotlight, I assume, the beginning of Brubaker's run next year. I don't want to be presumptuous. Maybe I'm wrong.
At some point of next year of Ed Brubaker's run, yes. But yes, these are three just amazing stories and just like I said, a crowning achievement, I guess, of the entire Brian Michael Bendis run on Daredevil.
I would agree.
So why don't we move on to the spotlight and talk about those final two issues? This week's spotlight story.
All right, Dwayne. So you have now told us that one of your favorite Bendis storylines, and in fact, one of your all-time favorite Daredevil storylines, was not good enough to be the spotlight story this week.
Oh, it was going to be until I read the Murdock papers, yes.
So hopefully there's something pretty decent here to have dissuaded you from making Decalogue our spotlight, which would have, I think, been also a relatively decent choice. But you've chosen Daredevil number 80 from February 2006 and Daredevil 81 from March 2006, essentially Murdock Papers parts 5 and 6 as the books you want to talk about. What's going on in these that made them so interesting for you?
I mean, this was quite the ending to this story and the ending of Brian Michael Bendis on Daredevil, and really, I think I don't know where you go from here. So let's talk about what happens in these books, because this is crazy. So as this book begins, Daredevil's been shot, but the FBI can't figure out where he is to make an arrest that Fisk helped them get. Fisk realizes there's only one place that Daredevil could have gone for help, and it's the night nurse. And he asks Ben Urich, who recently had done a profile on her in the Bugle, to reveal her location. When he won't, the FBI director starts threatening him, and eventually Urich gives up the location and the FBI attempt to go in for an arrest, but are met by the Hand, who Elektra had called in to help Daredevil, along with Luke Cage, Black Widow, and others. Ultimately, though, Matt Murdock gives himself up so that the fighting can finally stop. The Hand came to the aid of Daredevil, for gosh sakes. Talk about something I did not have on my bingo card.
Nope. Foreshadowing, folks. Foreshadowing. So, but yeah, this is a crazy issue. And I found it interesting that the night nurse is a very strange character. She's extremely precise and sort of cold, and it's the idea is that she's just sort of completely unflappable and kind of this person who's just there ready to at any moment repair any sort of injuries. But when Murdock's there, he's got substantial enough injuries going on that instead the Hand come in with their sort of ancient magics and start trying to work on him as well. So that's partly the reason they were there too, was even more than to defend him against the FBI. They were going to essentially heal his wounds and prevent him from dying. And so, yeah, it's kind of crazy. But everybody's there, everybody's fighting. The whole thing is pretty insane.
Yeah, there it is. For all the talk about how Brian Michael Bendis doesn't have a lot of action in some of his stories, issue 5, part 5 has a lot of action towards the end there.
Things do happen in that one. There's no question.
Yes.
Yes.
So from there, Matt Murdock goes on trial, and for a moment during arraignment, actually contemplates making a run for it, using his powers to leave the courtroom and leveraging Black Widow's connections with S.H.I.E.L.D. to give him a new identity in Europe along with his ex-wife Mila. The daydream quickly turns sour, though, as Murdock sees Bullseye coming after them and killing Mila. He pleads not guilty, and then is considered a flight risk and is sent to Rikers Island prison while he awaits trial. Now, you and we talked about this after you read it, and I had just finished reading it and we were like, what the heck just happened? Bullseye killed Mila in Europe. Tell me that was a dream sequence or something to that effect, I think was what you had messaged me. And I'm like, I think so. Because it transitions so seamlessly from him standing at the table in the courtroom to then just this absolutely zany, like, courtroom just flee attempt to him being on the run and in Europe in the matter of like 2 pages. And then all of a sudden Bullseye comes out of nowhere and is like, well, you could run, but you can't hide. I'm going to find you and I'm going to cause you pain just like I've caused you pain all these other times. And then, Mila ends up dead because Bullseye likes killing his girlfriends and all this. And I'm just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then all of a sudden he's back in the courtroom again. And so like, you don't realize that it actually was like this daydream.
It was nuts too, because I think initially you look at it and think, well, it makes some sense because we saw almost this exact same thing happen with the White Tiger.
Yeah.
He gets to that point and he's like, not going to go well for me. See ya. And then he just takes off out of the courtroom and ends up getting shot, right? And Matt ends up getting out and he gets away and he hangs out in, Europe, and it seems like everything's fine until it all goes completely downhill. Right? But yeah, it was really well done because you don't really have time to think about, oh, is this really happening? Until the point where you're basically back and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. It is so seamlessly done that you just assume that this is what's actually happening, and it is. And then like my heart just sank. I don't really like Mila is not. She for the way this situation has gone with her, like, I didn't feel like I was as invested in her as maybe I should be, or maybe I could be. But seeing her get killed by Bullseye was just
not acceptable.
Oh my God! It just really hit me, and I'm like, oh my God. And so I'm just dumbfounded staring at the page, and then I flip the digital page, and suddenly he's back at the courtroom, and you're just sort of like struck beside the head. Like, oh my God, that actually didn't happen.
Yes. Thank heavens that didn't happen.
Yes, thank God this didn't happen.
It's not like you'd have been surprised. What with the history of what's happened with this guy, if Bullseye had actually, killed his wife, because that's sort of the history of those two, But yeah, I think it was interesting also because what it did is really let us get kind of that window into how at a certain point he just has to stop, because everything he does hurts the people he cares about more than the last thing he did.
Right. Yeah. So meanwhile, if we're talking about Wilson Fisk, he gets that pardon for all his known past crimes and is released from prison. Now that all known past crimes turns out to be pretty important because the owl, seeing his story play out on the news, contacts the warden at Rikers Island where he is being imprisoned and gives the warden dirt on another murder previously unknown to the FBI. After Fisk makes a brief statement talking about how thankful he is to be out of prison, he is then immediately arrested by the FBI and sent back to Rikers Island. So
Yes.
if you're keeping score, we have Wilson Fisk, we have Matt Murdock, and we have the Owl, and they're all at Rikers Island at the same time.
And Bullseye's probably in there someplace too. Only broken
yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
So as this book ends, as this story ends, we see the FBI director and the warden at Rikers Island asking if it's such a good idea to have the Owl, Kingpin, and Matt Murdock all together in the same prison, to which the FBI director suggests that, hey, if they kill each other, it'll save some time and some taxpayer money.
Yeah, that guy is just... I mean, I like the fact that he had a secondary plan, maybe, or maybe he didn't. Because if the Owl hadn't come forward, I guess Fisk would have just gotten away with it, right? Because It's not like he had something else. I really dislike that guy. I really dislike that guy. So there you go.
But so that is the story, and that is where Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev leave Daredevil. You have him in prison awaiting trial, and you have him there with Kingpin and one of his other big adversaries, the Owl, all in the same prison. This was just a fantastic ending. This story felt epic. The stakes across this story felt like they were like, it just felt like an adrenaline rush the whole time. And the other thing I really liked about this, another brilliant plan by Fisk, even if it didn't work out the way he wanted. And I love the line that the Owl has in this. He's laughing and he says, "It's been said many times in many ways, but payback is a bitch." He says, as he's, thinking about the job well done to get Wilson Fisk put back into prison.
Yes.
I loved that.
Yeah, those two are interesting. I like the fact that essentially Bendis admits, he's like, this story would not have been possible if I didn't have somebody to hand it off to who was willing and able to deal with what you've done, right?
Right.
Because he's basically like, I've now just destroyed our main character's life and put him in jail. Enjoy, right? And if Brubaker wasn't coming in,
from here, yeah.
Yep. But evidently they were talking, and at a certain point, Brubaker's like, man, he really should just go to jail for all the stuff he's doing. And Bendis is like, yes, he should go to jail. And so they agreed kind of between them that this would be the handoff point, was Murdock heading into prison. And so, yeah, pretty fantastic. But
yeah.
it is a great finish.
Talk about changing the status quo, though. Holy cow. Oh, my goodness.
I think more than anything, I think more than anything for me, the thing that this story brings home is just how self-destructive Matt Murdock really is. Just how completely into himself he is. The number of people who he hurts and endangers, and the fact that through it all, he's got all of these friends who care about him more than he deserves, right?
Yes, definitely.
I mean, he has all of these women, these ex-girlfriends and current wife and everybody who continue to care about him and protect him, even though he has been really pretty terrible to most of them, right? He has lied, and he has left them, and he has cheated on them, and he's just, a lot of his other friends, like Foggy, he has not treated well at all over the last however long. Then Uruk, he lied to for the longest time. And all of these people still come to his defense.
Yeah.
And there is a point at which I think he just realizes I've got to grow up and take responsibility for my actions. And this is maybe where that begins. That there really is a point at the very end of the Bendis arc where there's a reason why Brubaker and Bendis sitting there looking at this would go, God, this dude is a prick. He just really needs to actually pay for some of this.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the real beauty of this story is if you look at the not just the Bendis arc, but really the entire second volume of Daredevil from Kevin Smith onward, it really is the story of this man's trauma and how he continues to have all these things happen, many of which I think he doesn't actually take responsibility for exactly how much of it is his fault, rather than just being stuff that's done to him. A lot of shitty things happen to Matt Murdock over the course of these 80-some issues, but almost all of them have a root somewhere in something he has done.
Yes.
To bring these events into the life of himself and the people that he cares about. You know?
Yeah, and at some point you presumably are going to have to pay for that, and he finally after all this time is finally presumably going to see some punishment for this, which is really interesting. I also liked the way that Bendis was able to bring back so many characters that he's used across the couple years that he's been doing this Daredevil run. He got to use so many people just one more time. I liked that Mila came back in all this. It felt like an ending, but it also felt like a new beginning as well. And I think that it's really that's a difficult thing to do in a story. And I think he was able to really to do that here. And I have to tell you that I was really interested in seeing what happened next. And like I could tell you I couldn't imagine needing to wait, month or two before the next issue came out and find out what was going on, because I'd been, no, you can't be serious.
That is a reasonable thing to know. It did suck back in the day trying to wait for a lot of these, but it's interesting to look back on now at just how cool these books were, and and just how much I must have been frustrated waiting to find out what happened when you get the story,
Yeah.
Because each of these has a decent chunk of story, but they're not complete by any means, and a lot of them left some big questions. So.
No, I was quickly going from one issue to the next, and would not have enjoyed waiting, 3-4 weeks until I could get another one.
Yep. That's kind of crazy. Kind of.
All right. So that is our spotlight for this week. Could not recommend. This whole year was a fantastic year of Daredevil. Like I said, I loved Decalogue, but the Murdock Papers, I think, was a really, really great ending to this. And Rookie of the Year, Ed Brubaker is coming in next, and I'm very curious. Like, I don't know where you go from here exactly, but it's like this was I was. Yeah. I don't. Unfair or not, I'm going to be comparing him to what I just read from Brian Michael Bendis, and I really hope that's not a letdown as a result of it, because like that's unfair.
It is, but if there's anybody that can do it, Ed Brubaker is also a fantastic crime writer. He's a fantastic character writer. I don't think you're going to have to worry too much. I mean, yes, these Bendis stories have been fantastic, but we are in the hands of a master coming up as well. So
all right.
it's all going to be fine. So,
all right.
Not to say that, again, like Bendis said in the sort of the epilogue where he's talking about things that he didn't necessarily want to leave Daredevil. He's like, I love writing this book, but they had other things that Marvel wanted him to do, and he was moving on to all these sort of universe building type of projects. He was a perfect writer for this title, but we're gonna get another really good one. So life will go on. I do think though that this was, when you look back at it, was one pretty fantastic 5-6 year run of comics by these guys.
Yeah, definitely.
So far, we've read 380 issues of Volume 1, 80 some issues of Volume 2. What do you think's better at this point?
I mean, I feel like the story for Volume 2, just the stories have been a lot more engaging to me in Volume 2 than they were in 1. But, like, you can't have Volume 2 without Volume 1. There's just...
Unfair question.
It is.
But I do think that the quality level, the consistency of the quality of Volume 2 has been fantastic.
Yes.
That, Smith's story to start out was maybe a little uneven, but also was fundamental, really, to what comes after. The audacity of him killing Karen Page then leads into a lot of the stuff that we get later. And, you get those initial really cool stories by David Mack, and then you get Bendis taking over, and then you get, now leading into Lark. It's pretty, and then leading into Brubaker. It's really going to be cool. But in any case, pretty decent stuff.
Yeah. Let's move on to the rapid fire questions about Daredevil for this week.
All right. See how this one goes. So, this week, first off, our romance question.
Yes.
Who's Matt in love with this year?
So it's Mila Donovan, which he didn't have much time for anybody else. So, and no one sort of, came into his office this year and suddenly caught his interest. And it turns out that she decided she wanted to give the relationship another chance. So that ended up working out really well until, he gets sent to prison at the end of the year.
And Natasha's been wandering around mostly naked in his office and the like, trying to seduce him, and he's been, not getting himself in any trouble there. So I think what did she say? Something like, have you been dating anybody? He's like, no, I'm married. So even though they'd kind of had it annulled or whatever in his mind, he still was married. So
right.
Who's our big villain of the year?
So while Alexander Bont might wish he was at the start of the year, the Kingpin, despite being in prison almost the entire year, was still the big villain this year because, he was putting plans in motion and ended up getting Matt Murdock put in prison by the time the year ended.
There we go. Did we see Matt practicing law this year?
Murdock was in court, but not as a lawyer.
we did not.
No, we did not.
Anyone know Matt's identity?
No, that secret's. Well, I mean, I guess the support group. You could count the support group potentially if they did not believe the Globe story.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But is Daredevil still a good guy this year?
So, I'm gonna say yes, and it's because of how he handled things and then admitting to the support group. that he is, that he is who he is, and admitting that he was Matt Murdock was Daredevil, and like also thinking about like other people, specifically Mila Donovan, when he's thinking about running during the Murdoch papers. I feel like if he wasn't a good guy, there's some different ways he could have gone in those instances, and I think showed he was a good guy this year in those instances.
And I would say even at the very end, that the fact that he made the decision to come out of the building and just finally stop it.
Yeah.
If we say, is he a good guy all year? He made some questionable decisions. There was that dark deep time of the soul where he's like, maybe I should just cut and run from the courtroom,
Right.
But yeah, I think that in the end, he has decided to work on becoming a better guy, maybe than he ever has. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
How about the Daredevil outfit? That change at all?
I didn't see any changes or updates to the outfit or his Billy Club this year.
No,
I
you barely saw it. So
yeah,
yeah.
True.
Learn anything new about Matt's past?
We saw actually quite a bit regarding Matt and Daredevil's past with regards to the previous Kingpin, Alexander Bont. So across that entire Golden Age story at the beginning of the year, we did get lots of flashbacks there.
There you go. And then there's also some in that Daredevil Father book as well. So if you go back and read that one, that would have some too.
Yeah.
And what do you think was the biggest moment of the year?
So to me, the biggest moment of the year was seeing Matt Murdock contemplate running from the courtroom and what would happen in that timeline if he had, which, as I said, was just jaw-dropping to actually see it. So it was just actually just like literally just shocking to me.
Yep.
But it was just a glimpse, and we ended up, the story ended where it should have ended, which is him in prison along with the Kingpin, and now we get to see where we go from here.
Yeah, I think even more specifically during that flashback, the point where Bullseye actually kills Noah is really kind of a, oh, really? Come on type of moment. So
yeah. All right, I think that wraps it up for Daredevil this year. This was a great year, and
it was.
I was excited about reading Daredevil when we started reading Daredevil, and like after kind of finishing this, like there's been lots of points that I've felt like this, but I am so glad that I read these stories. I'm just so glad that I now have these in my memory and can reflect back on them. And I'm really hoping that I get a few more of these before the end of this Daredevil run.
There are some pretty fantastic runs coming up. I don't know how much better than this they get, but there are. I think that depending on, with your affinity for Bendis, I don't know how many of them will take the crown for you, but we are not done with great stories in any way. So,
okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right, Dan, we get one more piece of business to talk about here before we leave this week, and that is the takeaway. This week's takeaway. All right, Dan, a huge year for movies, big year for DC. Marvel had a good year. Daredevil had a great year story-wise, but ended up in prison at the end of the year. Looking back and trying to encapsulate just one takeaway for 2005, I think is a tall order, but It is what you're meant to do. So, what is the takeaway if you look at the year in comics for 2005?
So this is almost more of just a feeling in many ways. But one of the things that I started almost getting this pit in my stomach when I was reading some of the things that we were seeing this year, because so many good things are happening in comics, but there's also this acceleration that's occurring where Marvel's putting out 400 and some books, where they put out a little over 300 and some last year. And there's just what seems like not so much a blossoming, but an explosion of stuff, right? And with that, you're seeing really, really good content. You're also seeing really bad content in some ways. It's not the way it was in the early 90s or the late 80s, where you had the black and white explosion where you just had absolutely anything flood the market. But it does seem like comics are starting to get ahead of themselves again. And more than that, when you look at the Eisners, there are so many just incredibly diverse story types. You've got the Nat Turner sort of historical stuff. You've got Owley. You've got great other stuff for middle-aged readers. All sorts of cool stories of just about every genre you can imagine. And yet, when you look at what's going into movie theaters, more and more comic book movies, like 3 Marvel movies, and 2 of them not particularly good, and DC bringing out all this stuff. And I feel almost like there's a missed opportunity here, where we are in sort of this beginning of a golden age for a return to the kind of comic books you had in the late 40s, sort of before the, before the seduction of the innocent and all of the comic book burning fests and all the rest, and the censorship, where there was just all of these different stories coming out. And comics were starting to finally get away from that idea that the comic book media or medium is somehow integrally tied to the superhero genre. But now, with Marvel sort of steaming forward, and a lot of these movies coming out, and the big crossovers taking over the stores again and everything, it's almost like we're losing that moment now. And I'm feeling like superheroes are sort of not only have taken over the comic store, but now they're going to try and take over the bookstore and the Cineplex.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that really wishes that the kind of movies that we've been getting, the comic book movies that weren't about comic books or weren't about superheroes, would really continue to be what we see. But it seems like more and more over the next few years, it's going to be science fiction and superhero stuff that makes it out of the comic pages into production, rather than things like A History of Violence,
Yeah.
And so I do think that there are signs of problems here, but as of right now, this is the healthiest comics ecosystem I have ever seen.
Like, definitely in like the last decade or something. Like,
Well,
this is.
no, really, the thing is that right now, you don't have a massive collector market. You don't have 12 variant covers everywhere. You don't have people buying comic books because they're going to get rich on it. You literally just have a comic hobby that, to a large extent, is driven by people enjoying reading comic books. And Vertigo is steaming ahead with just this fantastic selection of comics. Marvel has Icon and has all of these other imprints going that are allowing them to do sort of more mature titles. You have Bone out there kind of dominating the Scholastic market. it just seems like right now everything is really better than that's been even in the 90s.
It's
Because in the 90s, we were always on the brink of a collapse because it was
sure.
all being driven by a collecting mentality that could not be sustained. And at this point, that is not the case.
And it was also driven by like just the superhero genre too, wasn't it? It wasn't as diverse as it is now.
Oh, absolutely. The 90s, especially like the late part of the 80s, the early 90s, Image, a lot of this stuff, it was all very much superheroes, a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of horror, but even things like that. Spawn was kind of a horror comic, but it was a superhero horror comic.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, I would say that while there were a bunch of stuff, because there were so many books published in the late 80s and early 90s, you could find just about everything. But as far as really good quality science fiction, as far as really good quality horror, really good quality western or whatever, because there's um, Azarello came out with a really cool western book this year as well. I think it was just in DC, might have been Vertigo. There's all sorts of stuff for you to read if you're interested right now in the early 2000s, and it's kind of nice because the rest of the world hasn't noticed how cool what's happening is, so they haven't screwed it up yet. You know,
Sure.
because what happens is as soon as you get more notice, then the companies they want to monetize that, and they get bought
Yeah.
by companies that want to, you know, make more money off of that and off the IP and everything. So this is that weird sort of quiet time for Marvel where nobody is particularly expecting anything too much out of them. And so they're bringing in young guys and just absolutely knocking it out of the park. And DC's doing much the same thing. Comics have come back from the brink. They are now thriving quietly. And there's so much great stuff being put out right now, both by Marvel and DC, and by increasingly these sort of mid-tier small publishers as well. Because Image, Dark Horse, IDW is coming in. Now we're going to get all these others are doing great stuff. So, yeah, I would be perfectly happy with a 2005 style marketplace forever. But alas, I fear things are going to happen.
So things are going to change in the not too distant future, huh?
Not really for the bad. I mean, in actual truth, just in terms of they're going to swing back towards superheroes in a heavy way, in at a level I think is maybe excessive. And I obviously love superhero comics, but I like the entire medium. And this year, there was just stuff there for anybody.
Gotcha. All right, that's a good takeaway for this year. I think that sums up everything pretty well and kind of sets the stage for next week and 2006. But we'll get to that next week. And for now, we'll wrap things up. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. Now, if you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That'll help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Now, whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Share some thoughts about the end of the Brian Michael Bendis run in Daredevil. We'd love to hear them. You could send us those comments via email. That address is comments@comicsovertime.com, or you can reach out to us via Blue Sky on social media. We are at Comics Overtime there. Dan, it seems like it's going to be pretty hard for 2006 to top what we just got done looking at in 2005.
There you go. But it will still be pretty awesome. Every week I will get the job done. No worries.
Okay. We'll get to talk about that starting next week. But until then, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.